September 27, 1944, northeastern France. The landscape stretched under a thick, smoky haze of early autumn mist, broken only by the faint metallic glint of armored steel moving through the rolling fields. The German Panther tanks of the 2nd Panzer Division advanced with methodical precision, their tracks grinding deep into the damp earth that had been torn apart by weeks of relentless fighting. The morning air carried a strange mix of tension and confidence, the kind that came from men who believed they sat inside the finest tank ever built. To the German crews, the Panther was more than a weapon, it was a symbol of their technical mastery, the mechanical embodiment of the Reich's determination to dominate armored warfare. Its sloped armor, 80 mm thick at the front and angled at 35 degrees, gave it a resistance profile that made enemy shells glance away like pebbles against stone. The powerful 75 mm KWK-42L/70 gun, with a muzzle velocity exceeding 935 meters per second, could pierce Allied tanks at distances well beyond what the Americans thought possible. For over a year, the Panther had ruled the European battlefield, emerging from the chaos of Kursk and Normandy as both a terror and a legend. Allied reports often described it as nearly invincible, a predator among prey. Sherman crews whispered stories about Panthers shrugging off multiple hits before returning fire with a single devastating shot. That myth of invincibility had spread through the ranks like gospel, a belief that German engineering had created something untouchable. And on this cold September morning, that belief still burned bright among the men inside those tanks. The crews moved with machine-like discipline. Commanders stood half-exposed in their turrets, scanning the tree lines with binoculars, their black uniforms trimmed with dust and grime. Inside the hulls, loaders stacked shells with practiced rhythm, gunners adjusted elevation wheels, and radio operators murmured coded commands. The air inside the Panthers was hot and metallic, thick with the smell of oil and exhaust. Outside, the French countryside bore the scars of a continent at war, shattered barns, burned-out farmhouses, and craters large enough to swallow a jeep. Yet the German tankers felt a strange calm. Intelligence reports suggested the Americans ahead of them were retreating, their Sherman tanks no match for the Panther's long-range firepower. The crews believed it would be another day of hunting, a few well-placed shots, a few plumes of black smoke rising from burning Allied armor. Nothing suggested that anything had changed. Nothing hinted that the Americans had quietly rolled out a weapon that would rewrite the laws of tank warfare. Far across the field, the Americans were preparing something new. The M4 Sherman, once mocked as a Ronson, a lighter, faster tank known more for bursting into flames than for killing German armor, had undergone a transformation. Months earlier, American ordnance engineers had introduced a new gun, the 76 mm M1, a weapon designed to punch through even the heaviest German tanks. Its high-velocity ammunition, particularly the M62 armor-piercing capped round and the new HVAP tungsten core shell, could achieve penetration figures previously thought impossible for a medium tank. On paper, it could pierce the Panther's frontal armor at distances of up to 1,500 yards if the angle and conditions were right. Yet few on the German side knew of its existence. American production lines had worked tirelessly to retrofit Shermans with this new weapon, shipping them quietly across the Atlantic under the cover of standard logistics reports. The result was an army that looked the same from a distance, same green silhouette, but now carried a far deadlier sting. As dawn broke, the two forces unknowingly drew within range of each other. The terrain between them was a mixture of open wheat fields and small patches of forest. Visibility was limited by the lingering fog, but the Americans had the advantage of elevation. From the ridge above, Captain William H. Browning's Sherman platoon waited in ambush, their 76 mm guns already zeroed on the expected German advance. The crews knew they were outnumbered, but they had confidence in their new weapon and in the element of surprise. The tension was palpable, engines idled low, men whispered, fingers hovered over triggers. The first Panther appeared through the haze, its long barrel scanning the horizon, its commander unaware that he was already in someone's crosshairs. The American gunner adjusted his scope, calculating the distance, roughly 1,500 yards. In any previous battle, he would have held fire, knowing his 75mm gun would barely scratch the Panther's armor from that range. But this time was different. He exhaled slowly, steadied his aim, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil jolted through the hull, a thunderous blast echoing across the valley. The shell, a 76mm HVAP round, cut through the mist like a beam of light, covering the distance in less than 2 seconds. It struck the Panther's glassy plate, not at an ideal angle, but with such velocity that it shattered the armor's integrity. The round penetrated clean through, igniting ammunition inside and sending a jet of flame bursting from the turret ring. For a brief moment, the battlefield went silent, as if nature itself had paused in disbelief. Then came the explosion, a roar that tore through the still air, followed by a plume of black smoke curling toward the sky. The German crews nearby froze. The impossible had just happened. Inside the surviving Panthers, panic replaced confidence. The commander of the second tank shouted orders, swinging his gun toward the distant ridge, but he was too slow. Another American shell found its mark, punching through the side armor. Flames spread, ammunition cooked off, and within moments, another mighty German tank was reduced to a burning wreck. The myth of invulnerability had been shattered in less than a minute. The 76mm M1 gun had proven that no armor was absolute, no machine immortal. The Panther crews, who once laughed at Allied firepower, now found themselves in a fight for survival against an enemy they had underestimated. The shock rippled through the German lines. Reports crackled over the radios, confused voices describing tanks being destroyed at unheard-of distances. The officers refused to believe it at first. Some thought it must have been an artillery strike, or a lucky hit. But as more Panthers were hit, as more black columns of smoke rose across the countryside, denial gave way to dread. The Americans had changed the game. The introduction of the 76mm gun, combined with improved tactics, better coordination, use of terrain, and superior communication, meant the once dominant German armor was now facing an opponent that had learned from its losses. The American gunners, once cautious and defensive, were now taking the initiative, engaging from positions that gave them both cover and control of distance. Meanwhile, the German crews realized too late that their armor advantage no longer guaranteed safety. Many tried to angle their tanks, to use the terrain for protection, but the fields offered little cover. The new American shells did not behave like the old ones, they struck with precision and devastating kinetic energy. At 1,500 yards, the Panthers were being hit from ranges they considered safe, a psychological blow as much as a tactical one. The fear was palpable. What had once been calculated confidence turned into hesitation. Crews second-guessed their movements, commanders hesitated before advancing, and the aura of superiority that had carried the German tank force for years began to erode. For the Americans, the victory went beyond a single battle. It was a symbolic turning point. For the first time in the European theater, they had a tank gun that could engage and destroy the feared Panther head-on, at a distance that gave them the upper hand. The men who had once watched helplessly as their 75mm shells bounced off German armor now fought with renewed spirit. The 76mm M1 gun gave them something intangible, confidence. That confidence spread quickly, influencing tactics, morale, and the very rhythm of armored warfare. It marked the beginning of a new phase in the Western Front, where technological parity began to shift toward the Allies. The Panther, though still a formidable machine, was now vulnerable in ways its designers had never imagined. The engineers at MAN and Daimler-Benz, who had painstakingly crafted its armor and slope geometry, could not have predicted that within months, American metallurgy and ballistics research would produce ammunition capable of neutralizing their masterpiece. The Germans continued to improve their tanks, adding side skirts, reinforcing weak points, upgrading optics, but they were fighting against time, resources, and industrial capacity that could no longer keep pace with Allied production. The Americans, by contrast, could afford to lose tanks, learn from every engagement, and come back stronger the next day. By the end of September 1944, the Panthers' dominance was no longer unquestioned. The 76mm M1 gun had altered the perception of the battlefield. Its long, slender barrel became a symbol of quiet power, the equalizer that gave Allied crews a fighting chance against German armor. Though the Panther would continue to fight fiercely until the war's end, its crews never again enjoyed the same sense of superiority. They had learned, through fire and destruction, that no weapon remains unmatched forever. Technology evolves, tactics adapt, and war, the great leveler, always finds a way to humble even the most advanced machines. In that single morning engagement in northeastern France, the shift became undeniable. Smoke rose from the wrecks of once feared tanks, their hulls scorched and twisted. The fields that had been Germany's hunting grounds were now a graveyard of steel. For the American crews, it was a moment of vindication, proof that their perseverance, their engineering, and their courage had finally paid off. For the Germans, it was a moment of reckoning, a harsh reminder that even the greatest war machines are not immortal. The story of that battle spread quickly, told and retold among tankers across both sides of the front. It became a whispered legend, the day when the mighty Panther was pierced at 1,500 yards, and the myth of German invincibility crumbled under the weight of American innovation. In the days that followed the first shocking engagement, the German High Command found itself grappling with a grim realization that spread like wildfire through the panzer divisions stationed across northern France. The reports were consistent and alarming. Panthers were being destroyed at unprecedented ranges by American tanks that should not, by any calculation, have been capable of such feats. At first, the German officers refused to believe it. The Oberkommando des Heers, OKH, the German Army High Command, dismissed the initial claims as exaggerations from shaken crews or the result of misidentification. Perhaps the Americans had secretly employed 17-pounder, armed British Fireflies or some new variant of self-propelled anti-tank artillery. But as more and more wrecked Panthers were examined in the field, the truth could no longer be denied. Armor plates that should have deflected hits bore clean penetration holes. Engineers, officers, and frontline inspectors gathered around the smoking carcasses of once proud tanks, tracing the impact craters with gloved fingers, measuring the entry angles, and staring in disbelief at the torn steel that told a story of defeat. Something had changed, and it was not merely the tactics of the enemy, it was the weapon itself. Inside German command posts, maps were unrolled, reports stacked high on wooden desks, and technical officers pored over every detail that could explain the sudden shift. The Panther, the pride of the Panzerwaffe, had been designed as an answer to the Soviet T-34, combining firepower and armor in a balanced form unmatched by any other tank of its generation. Yet now, it was being pierced from the front by American guns that, on paper, should never have managed such a thing. For the German engineers, this was not only a tactical problem, it was a blow to their engineering pride, a challenge to the very belief that German design could remain years ahead of the Allies. At the proving grounds outside Kassel, metallurgists re-examined armor compositions, testing for flaws in the steel. War conditions had forced Germany to use lower-quality alloys with increasing frequency. Nickel and molybdenum, vital to producing high-tensile armor, were growing scarce due to Allied blockades. The once superior armor plate of the Panther was gradually losing its resilience, becoming more brittle under stress. That brittleness, combined with the higher velocity and improved cap design of the American M62 and HVAP rounds, was producing catastrophic results. What should have been a ricochet now became a full penetration. In field workshops, mechanics and surviving tank crews tried desperately to understand how their supposedly invulnerable machines were falling so quickly. Some commanders reported hearing the metallic crack of impact followed instantly by the deep, horrifying humph of internal ignition, the telltale sign of a shell penetrating through the frontal plate and detonating. Ammunition. In many cases, the crews never had time to escape. Post-battle analyses conducted by field officers like Major Heinrich Beckmann of Panzer Regiment III described scenes of carnage inside the destroyed Panthers, charred control panels, melted optics, and blackened corpses still clutching the handles of their escape hatches. Beckmann's report, sent to Berlin in early October 1944, bluntly stated that the enemy has developed a weapon capable of defeating the Panther from beyond our expected engagement distance. Our crews are losing confidence in their machines. Those words, measured and formal, carried a deeper terror, the psychological collapse of belief in invincibility. The German High Command reacted in two ways, scientifically and doctrinally. On the scientific side, engineers at companies like Henschel, Mann, and Krupp began frantic studies into ways of improving the Panther's armor profile. Some suggested thickening the frontal glacis from 80 mm to 100 mm, while others proposed applying spaced armor or side skirts of hardened steel to deflect kinetic projectiles. But the reality was grim. German industry, strained by constant Allied bombing, lacked the materials, labor, and transportation capacity to implement such upgrades on a wide scale. Factories in Nuremberg and Kassel were operating at reduced output, fuel shortages slowed supply trains, and every new improvement meant fewer tanks could be produced. The engineers knew that even if they reinforced the armor, it would come at the cost of speed and mobility, the very traits that made the Panther effective. Each modification added weight, strained transmissions, and risked mechanical breakdowns. On the doctrinal side, the German panzer divisions began re-evaluating their engagement tactics. Orders circulated across divisions, emphasizing new defensive doctrines: avoid open-field duels at long range, use terrain masking and ambush tactics, strike from covered positions, and fall back before superior firepower. The once aggressive spirit of the panzer crews, trained to dominate and advance, was being replaced with a doctrine of survival and cunning. Officers were instructed to coordinate more closely with infantry and artillery, using camouflage and deception to compensate for their declining armor advantage. The message was clear: the Panther was no longer untouchable. Crews had to adapt or die. Among the rank and file, however, fear was spreading. Tank crews were notoriously superstitious, and the sudden loss of several veteran Panthers at long range became the stuff of whispered nightmares. In the barracks and repair depots, men spoke of the invisible gun, a mysterious American weapon that could kill them before they even saw where the shot came from. Some claimed the Americans had developed a new type of explosive filler, or that they were using captured German rounds retooled for higher velocity. Others simply stopped believing in their armor altogether. Veterans who had once faced down dozens of Shermans with calm confidence now flinched at the sound of distant gunfire. The mystique of the Panther, the psychological armor that had shielded its crews as much as the steel plates themselves, was beginning to crack. Field commanders like General Otto von Manschufel, one of the most respected panzer leaders of the war, noted the change in morale. In his after-action reports, he wrote that while the Panther remained a formidable tank, its crews were no longer advancing with the same boldness, and that enemy firepower has reached parity, if not superiority, at medium ranges. That admission, from a man who had once championed German armored supremacy, marked a turning point in doctrine and perception alike. The German command began urging its forces to fight in pairs or platoons, using overlapping fields of fire to compensate for the loss of individual dominance. Yet even this tactic could not erase the growing sense of vulnerability. The enemy had found a way to reach them, and that knowledge lingered like a shadow over every operation. The industrial and logistical challenges only deepened the crisis. With fuel reserves dwindling and Allied air superiority cutting off supply lines, Panther units often entered battle with less than half their tanks operational. Maintenance crews worked through the night to keep the complex, delicate machinery running, but spare parts were scarce. A broken gearbox or damaged suspension often meant abandoning the tank entirely. Each lost Panther was irreplaceable, and every penetration by a 76 mm shell represented not only a tactical loss but also a strategic one. The Allies, meanwhile, were producing tanks faster than the Germans could destroy them. American factories could turn out dozens of Shermans in the time it took to build a single Panther. The quality gap that had once favored Germany was being overtaken by the sheer quantity and improving effectiveness of Allied technology. By late October 1944, the German Armored Office had issued a technical bulletin acknowledging that the new American 76 mm gun posed a serious threat to current Panther and Tiger operations. The bulletin recommended increased use of side skirts, field improvisations such as sandbags and spare track links mounted on the glacis, and tactical shifts to minimize exposure to long-range fire. Photographs from that period show Panthers laden with makeshift armor, spare road wheels welded to the front, bags of cement strapped to the sides, logs lashed across the hull, desperate attempts to regain the lost edge. But these measures offered little real protection against the velocity of a tungsten core round traveling at nearly 1,000 meters per second. The Americans had not only caught up, in some respects, they had surpassed the very tank that had once dominated them. The psychological impact of this revelation cannot be overstated. War, especially armored warfare, is as much a battle of confidence as of mettle. The Panther had given its crews an aura of superiority that emboldened them to take risks, to attack even when outnumbered, and to rely on their machine's supposed invincibility. Once that aura was broken, their effectiveness diminished sharply. Reports from intelligence officers attached to Allied forces noted that German tank units were becoming more cautious, less inclined to press attacks, and quicker to withdraw under sustained fire. The 76mm gun had achieved more than battlefield kills, it had fractured the morale of the elite Panzer arm. In Berlin, senior officers debated how to respond. Some proposed accelerating the introduction of the Tiger II, King Tiger, whose armor could theoretically resist even the 76mm at long range. But the Tiger II was an engineering nightmare, too heavy, too slow, prone to breakdowns, and impossible to mass-produce under the collapsing industrial system. Others suggested focusing on mobile anti-tank weapons like the Jag Panther or Hetzer, vehicles that could use stealth and firepower rather than brute strength. Yet all these measures came too late to reverse the tide. The Allies now controlled the skies, the seas, and increasingly the land. German armor was being hunted from above by fighter bombers and from afar by weapons it had once dismissed as inferior. Among Panther crews themselves, adaptation became a matter of instinct. They began painting their tanks in darker camouflage patterns, using hedgerows and buildings as shields, and firing from hull-down positions to reduce their exposure. They learned to fight like hunted animals, to strike quickly and disappear. Gone were the days of open field superiority, the age of ambush and retreat had begun. Some tank commanders even instructed their gunners to aim not for destruction but for disabling shots, hoping to buy time for withdrawal rather than total victory. This shift in mindset marked a profound change in German armored philosophy, a concession that the initiative now belonged to the enemy. As the weeks passed and the front lines continued to collapse, German commanders could only watch as their once feared tank divisions dwindled in strength. Each engagement cost them irreplaceable machines and experienced crews. Replacement crews were younger, less trained, and increasingly fatalistic. They climbed into the steel beasts knowing that the armor around them was no longer a guarantee of survival. The stories of Panthers being penetrated from 1,500 yards haunted every new recruit, turning confidence into quiet resignation. The tank that had once symbolized the height of German military might was now a fading relic, its glory tarnished by the relentless advance of Allied innovation. The German reaction to the 76mm M1 gun was not immediate panic, but a slow, dawning realization, the understanding that their technological edge had finally been matched and surpassed. In a war driven by constant adaptation, the Panther's fall from supremacy was both inevitable and tragic. It remained a formidable machine, capable of killing and feared until the end, but its myth had been broken. From that point on, the crews who entered its iron hulls did so with the knowledge that they were no longer the hunters, they were being hunted. For the men of the United States Army, the revelation that their new 76mm M1 gun could kill a Panther at 1,500 yards was more than a tactical success, it was a psychological liberation. For years, Allied tank crews had lived under the shadow of German armor superiority, a shadow cast by the names Panther and Tiger, whispered with both respect and fear. In North Africa, in Italy, and across the hedgerows of Normandy, the Sherman crews had fought bravely but suffered heavy losses, often going into battle knowing that their 75mm guns could not penetrate the thick sloped armor of the German heavy tanks except at dangerously close range or from the flanks. Many American tankers spoke grimly of having to close within 500 yards to even have a chance at disabling a Panther, a suicidal range when facing a weapon as accurate and deadly as the German 75mm KWK-42L/70. They learned to fight with ingenuity, teamwork, and sacrifice, often calling in artillery or fighter bombers when faced with the larger predators. But after September 1944, that dynamic began to shift. The moment the 76mm M1 gun proved itself capable of piercing a Panther's armor head-on, a transformation began across the U.S. armored forces, one that reshaped both their tactics and their confidence. The news spread fast through every armored unit on the Western Front. Word of mouth carried it quicker than any official report. In bivouacs, mess tents, and motor pools, tankers traded the story like gospel: the new gun can do it, 1,500 yards, straight through the Panther's front. At first, many refused to believe it, dismissing it as another morale-boosting rumor. But then came the photographs. Black and white images circulated among commanders showing knocked-out German tanks with clean entry holes through their frontal glacis. Those images, along with combat reports filed by units like the 3rd Armored Division and the 2nd Armored Division, left no doubt: the American engineers had delivered a weapon that could finally stand toe-to-toe with the best Germany had to offer. For the tank crews, who had endured months of losses and psychological pressure, this was a turning point. It was not just about firepower, it was about reclaiming their confidence, their courage, and their identity as a force capable of winning on equal terms. At the Ordnance Department back in the United States, engineers and ballistics experts received the first combat reports with a sense of vindication. For months, they had faced criticism from field commanders and even from General Eisenhower himself, who had initially expressed doubts about the need for a new gun. Many within the U.S. Army hierarchy had argued that the 75mm gun was sufficient, emphasizing logistics and mobility over raw power. But the men at Aberdeen Proving Ground and the Watervliet Arsenal, where the M1 had been developed and tested, knew that the war was changing. Their tireless experimentation with higher pressure chambers, improved recoil systems, and refined projectile designs had paid off. The M1's muzzle velocity of over 792 meters per second, combined with the advanced ballistic cap of the M62 armor-piercing shell and the availability of tungsten-cored HVAP rounds, gave it a performance envelope previously unseen in American tank armament. When the field reports confirmed penetrations against Panthers, cheers echoed through the laboratories and workshops. The engineers knew what that meant: the balance had finally shifted. In the field, the psychological effect was immediate and profound. Tank crews who had once fought with defensive caution now began to take initiative. The 76mm Shermans, identifiable by their longer barrels and muzzle brakes, became prized assets in every armored platoon. Commanders often positioned them at the front of columns, using their superior penetration power to engage enemy armor at longer ranges. New tactics emerged almost overnight. Instead of relying on flanking maneuvers to target the weaker side armor of German tanks, American units began setting up long-range ambushes, exploiting open terrain and ridgelines to engage first. The mantra became simple: shoot fast, shoot first, shoot accurately. For the first time since the Normandy landings, American tankers could look across a battlefield dotted with Panthers and Tigers and feel something unfamiliar: confidence. This newfound assurance radiated through the entire armored doctrine. Training manuals were updated to reflect the new gun's capabilities, emphasizing standoff engagements and precision fire. Tank destroyer units, equipped with vehicles like the M18 Hellcat and M36 Jackson, coordinated more seamlessly with Sherman formations, creating combined arms strategies that maximized the destructive power of American armor. Air support from P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs further amplified this synergy, ensuring that no German counterattack could mass without being spotted and punished. The war had become an ecosystem of innovation, and the 76mm gun was the keystone of that transformation. Beyond the battlefield, the psychological effect rippled all the way back to the home front. In Detroit and Chicago, where factories like Chrysler, Fisher Body, and Pressed Steel Car Company churned out tanks day and night, production workers took pride in knowing that their labor was changing the course of the war. Posters on factory walls began to feature images of Even on the German side, captured reports and intercepted communications confirmed the growing fear of the new American weapon. German tank crews began referring to the long-barreled Shermans as Langnasen, long noses, and were instructed to treat them with the same caution once reserved for British Fireflies. To the Americans, this was a validation of their progress. The enemy's fear was proof of success, and every burned-out Panther became a symbol of Allied ascendance. In Washington and London, military planners studied the implications closely. The success of the 76mm gun was a sign that Allied technology could not only compete but innovate faster than Germany's war machine, even under pressure. It demonstrated that wartime adaptability, the ability to respond to enemy advancements with equal or greater ingenuity, was now firmly in Allied hands. American engineers began refining ammunition types further, experimenting with improved ballistic caps and even early prototypes of discarding sabot rounds. The experience in France became a laboratory for modern warfare, where lessons learned one week were implemented on the battlefield the next. For the individual tanker, however, the reality remained brutal. Even with the improved gun, the Sherman was still a lighter tank, with thinner armor and a tendency to ignite when hit. But the psychological balance had changed. Crews no longer felt helpless, they fought with purpose, knowing that their weapon could match the enemy's. Many after-action reports describe moments of triumph, tankers cheering as enemy Panthers exploded under their fire, the air filling with the acrid smoke of victory and vengeance. One report from the 2nd Armored Division noted that crew morale is markedly higher since the introduction of the new gun. Confidence in our tanks has improved considerably. These understated words concealed a powerful truth: the American fighting spirit had been reignited. The 76mm M1 gun was more than a technical achievement, it was the embodiment of a national philosophy. It represented the belief that no obstacle was insurmountable, that through innovation and determination, any problem could be solved. In the factories, laboratories, and battlefields, that belief became reality. The gun's design, simple, reliable, efficient, reflected the very principles that defined America's war effort. It was not the most powerful gun of the war, nor mounted on the most armored tank, but it was enough to restore balance, to prove that the Americans could meet the Germans on equal terms and win. By the end of 1944, this newfound confidence was shaping strategic decisions at every level. Allied offensives pushed deeper into Germany, and wherever American tanks advanced, they did so with the assurance that their weapons could handle whatever lay ahead. The psychological impact extended beyond the tank crews to the infantry and support units who fought alongside them. Soldiers who once hesitated to follow armored assaults now marched forward with trust in the steel spearhead before them. The 76mm gun had, in a very real sense, unified the battlefield, turning fear into forward motion. In retrospect, historians would later note that the introduction of the 76mm M1 gun was not just a technical milestone but a moral one. It symbolized the moment when the Allies truly began to believe in their own superiority, not as a matter of propaganda, but as a lived reality. The battlefield in northeastern France, where that first Panther fell at 1,500 yards, became the silent witness to a transformation that rippled across continents. It was the moment when the industrial power of democracy, the ingenuity of its engineers, and the courage of its soldiers converged into a single decisive advantage. The Americans had found their answer to the German war machine, not in myth, but in measured steel. And from that day forward, every shot fired from a 76mm gun carried not just explosive force, but the weight of inevitability, the certainty that the tide of war had turned.